Don't I need something to put into it? No, USB. Oh, it's already in there. Oh, wow. So you don't lose it. Brilliant.
Cool. I think the echo. What is the echo? I hear it. It's so cool.
But it's a delay.
Yeah, there is a delay, so that we can censor any
But
material. So can you help me with this then, Said? Maybe the echo is coming from here. So where will you be standing, Tim? This way?
Yeah.
Here or?
I'll try and stand a bit.
I can tilt it.
perhaps we need to
This isn't.
This one?
We need to turn.
no. Turn this one. No. No. How can you increase this? No, the other one.
I can't. See, it's moving. See, it's sensitive.
Yeah, but
Hello?
maybe
This one is responsible for the...
just mute this and turn that off. Now turn that off. No, wait. No. There's a delay, I guess. 1, 2, 3. But it's not perfect.
Hello?
This is still not working. Turned on or?
It's not bad.
Oh, it's off.
So, Tim... Yeah, it's fine. Yes, this way.
So when do we start?
I think...
We have still 5 minutes. Maybe you should stop the stream so because it records everything.
I'm just trying to get it closer.
Don't worry. It's found footage. You can shake it a little.
Roche Brothers.
I actually started a Twitter fight with Trump. Built interest.
So this is Red Velvet, and the other one is Pumpkin.
And we are going to be using the whiteboard.
Yeah.
So maybe I should go there.
I will come here.
I just don't want anyone to hit you walking back and forth. You may want to get up and use the whiteboard.
Yeah, you will be probably.
Correct my thinking. Improve my thinking.
Yeah, we're streaming. Go ahead, Tim. Take it away.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for coming to the CLM and everyone who's online. This session actually began as a discussion just last Sunday based on a New York Times article, and we talked over it with Rot, Saeed, and I, and thought that maybe having a series of CLMs that interspace that deal with the dynamic phenomenon of the politics, because we're in a presidential season. There's lots of dynamics in a presidential season, and there's lots of dynamics in the candidates, so this is a good year to maybe space these out. So this session is very informal. Don't let the fancy dress dissuade you. This is actually for an event after this, but I don't want to, we're looking for participation folks online. If there's questions, go ahead and post them. We may have folks in the room jump up to the whiteboard. We're going to specifically look about anti-politics, which was the topic of the David Brooks column in the New York Times, and also a little bit about cliodynamics. So first, some ground rules, right? Quote from Thomas Jefferson, never considered a difference of opinion in politics and religion and philosophy as cause for withdrawing from a friend. So we're talking about politics. Let's keep it calm and neutral. The goal is to explore dynamics, not change political persuasions. We've got a wealth of diversity here and online, so this is going to be based in the U.S. type discussion, but there may be different cultures have different political dynamics, and that might be interesting to explore later on. This is a discussion, not a presentation, so interrupt, stop, go to the whiteboard, draw something, paste pictures if you're online. Let's make this interactive. Right? The differential equations approach to apply a mathematical model to historical behaviors. So what that means in English is that it's taking the traditional fields that looked at text, like history and political science, or maybe looked at groups of people and how they interacted in anthropology, and it merges it with mathematical model and analytical rigor. This is a very new field, but it allows some very interesting things to be asked is, could it have happened? So there have been cliodynamic models of Civil War locations of wagon remains used to examine, did the march actually go where they thought it went? Did this historical behavior, could it have actually worked? And if it did work, how did it work? So this brings also a new level of understanding sometimes. And what insights can we gain to enhance our understanding? That's really the goal. Is sometimes the models don't work perfectly, but it allows us to explore. And it's a new field. The first journal began in 2010. And I have a history degree myself, which is why I'm interested in cliodynamics. And it's the Journal of Quantitative History and Cultural Evolution. I don't think, though, there's a single system dynamic model in that journal. So the first question I have is cliodynamics a good fit for system dynamics?
Of course it is.
Yep. Why?
I think we have some examples of this. The dynastic cycle, actually developed by Saeed, fits to that category. My Cartesian category also, I think, fits in that category.
Have we been doing cliodynamics all along, and this just may be under a different name?
A couple of years ago, I met a historian colleague. He works at Clark University, one of the local universities. And we had a casual conversation, and he was trying to explain the difference between the paths the Egyptian and the English economies took after both had a bout of plague. In one case, the plague was in some ways productive. It created a dynamic which took it to progress. In the other case, it created a dynamic which took the agricultural economy to demise.
That's actually,
He had a mathematical model, and I looked at it. It was very simple system dynamics.
The case you're talking about is actually very well researched in the textual basis in history. It's the dynamics Professor Saeed was referring to, because we studied this a little bit, is in Europe, the plague cleaned out populations and allowed for sort of rising questions of rights and dynamics of towns, because there was so few population now that every person became valuable. And the plague happened once. It kind of came through, it lasted for a long time, but it happened once. In Egypt, I don't know the exact number, but there were repetitive plagues that they were hit by over and over and over again, I think 14 times. So this would be a good example of using simple system dynamics model to say, what are the differences and how did that affect progress? How did that affect development? I have a colleague at the University of Alabama who had talked to me about using system dynamics to explain the dispersion of trade from Minoa. on Crete, and using the location of artifacts and recovered items to sort of map and then say, okay, this is the dispersion. How would the dispersion work? How would the models work? So I think there is a good fit for system dynamics in this, and I think it's especially useful for political and understanding human behavior. Modeling political phenomena. I did a very quick research, so this is not exhaustive, but I found 2 D memos that include the politics as an aspect. We have one from Professor Said, which is a latent structure, government support for economic agendas. And then one from Said in the back, simulation model of Cartesian's theory. It's arbitrary state in society. The question is, though, are these models always tied to economics? And if so, can we distinguish or can we pull out politics from economics? This is not an easy question. What do you think?
No.
No. So we have a no that politics can't be pulled from economics. When you look at these models, 90% of them are quantifiable economic activity with relatively simplified political activity that drives some of the dynamics. And they're very good explaining because they're explaining behavior. Said's model is excellent because it looks a lot at things like concepts of arbitrary. Very difficult to quantify and model, but absolutely key to understanding the dynastic cycle in Iran. So here's a question. Could you model organizational behavior without understanding the financial aspects of the firm? Could I model IBM's political managerial politics at the corporate level divorced from the financial statements?
Actually, if I were to quote Forrester always felt that the financial aspects of the firm were overstated. The fundamentals arise out of managerial operations, which you call operations, and likewise in an economy also the role of Fed is overstated. It doesn't generate the basic dynamics. It just is a hygiene.
Interesting. What do you mean by hygiene?
Well, a hygiene that can slightly change an existing behavior.
So it's more at the increment, sort of marginal. I should probably stop using IBM as an example since I no longer work there, but I would say from experience that a lot of times the political dynamics are completely divorced from, and it's just personal relationships. I mean, it's not that it only happens at IBM, it happens in every organization. I guess my contention would be that in some cases, political behavior could be examined divorced from economics, but I think you might not be able to explain it all without bringing in economics, because politics is so big that there's got to be motivations of why we're reacting to political, whereas in an organization, it may be one-to-one and sort of I have my group of supporters or people I'm aligned with as a manager and executive, could even be hundreds. But that political dynamic might, I don't know what the right answer is, but the question is, can you model purely human behavior? Did you model purely human behavior?
Yeah, in my research on organizations and the behavior of groups, it was not tied to economics at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was about expression of voice and processing of these views, so it had nothing to do with economics.
What I'm thinking is that if your objectives are defined beyond economic agendas, like utility is a very neutral term in economics, and value is a very, I shouldn't say neutral, very inclusive. Value can include the value that you place on power, and the costs and benefits, if these are defined beyond financial costs and benefits, then the difference vanishes. That we are all trying to maximize utility and value for ourselves, and we are constrained by the system. We are very, very exclusive in our behavior, but the system rules make the outcomes inclusive.
You were going to say something.
I see economics as a political system. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you can examine the politics without the economics, but I don't think you could examine the economics without the politics. Because I think
Interesting.
that
Say that, explore it more.
for me, economics is a subsection of politics. So economics is not just about rational action, but it is a politically motivated, politically embedded, socially embedded set of behaviors, etc. So, yeah. So I was going to say, when you say, I think it depends on the depth at which you want to explain and what you're trying to explain for what reasons, right? Yeah, you can model certain economic systems without considering the politics, but it depends on what your question is and what your purpose in modeling is, maybe. But I'm not a scientist.
No, but this is not something with maybe a right or wrong answer. I think in some ways, at the very least, it goes back to the basics. A good problem definition. What are you looking at? What is the problem you're looking at? Being very clear in your model boundaries. Where do we limit the models? What's our perspective and bias that we bring to it? These are all things we should be doing anyways as modelers, but I think especially on this topic, it might be good to make that explicit. So.
Lawrence is saying that yes, we can model behavior. We want to say it's rational choice model.
Excellent. He would do very well, by the way, with historians who never model economic behavior. I mean, they do, but a lot of times historical history is a history of political personalities, and a good approach for biodynamics might be to say, is that really a personality system of these kings and monarchs and, quote-unquote great people, or is it more of a system manifestation that they happen to inhabit that can't be divorced from the fundamental underlyings of the system? Good question. Thank you, Lawrence. So the first case of the rise and fall of anti-politics, this only came about because on Sunday morning, Rafat forwarded me an article from the New York Times by David Brooks. It's linked on the slide, so if you download the slide, you can click the link, where he was describing two terms, politics and anti-politics. And his definition, it comes from a book actually, is politics is a way of ruling divided societies without undue violence, right? That's, if war is, or if policy is, war is politics by other means, obviously politics, you want to avoid the violence. And he defined anti-politics as a delegitimized compromise in deal-making. So groups of people who are willing to trample the customs and rules that give legitimacy to legislative decision-making if it helps them gain power. Now, this is obviously a relevant topic for the current campaign. David Brooks said there are elements of these on both sides of the aisle. But what we're looking at is, what if this is what we're studying, anti-politics is the problem, what are some of the dynamics associated with it? And in his column, David proposed positive feedback effect. He didn't model it, he described it. He said it was downward spirals, which sounds to us like a vicious positive reinforcing system. He said his explanation was that anti-politics people elect legislatures who have no political skills or experience. Those legislatures go into a situation where their incompetence leads to dysfunctional government, which leads to more disgust with government, which leads to demand for even more outsiders. So this is a classical feedback loop, positive feedback loop. Now this feedback loop, as we know, will probably grow forever if it doesn't have a limit. But the question is, if we're looking at this in the standard method approach to SDs, we have a problem of anti-politics, what's the behavior map? So it's very difficult in some of these cases to find data that you can use cleanly. So this is obviously a quick look. I went up to Pew. Excellent site, by the way, for political discussions, because they have opinion polls and things like that. It's not a perfect proxy. So this is more of a proxy with potential behavior mode. And what you see is the dark blue line that the mouse over is hanging over actually represents trust in the system on their poll. And the light blue line represents distrust, which obviously they're working in opposing methods. But you can certainly see there's a little bit of oscillation. If you cut out the noise, and you kind of slice it down and make it simple, if you were to smooth this out, you would see an oscillating pattern. This is from 1960 to 2010. However, there's an oscillating pattern. The oscillating pattern does have, for trust, a declining function. Over time, it's going from a high that is, I don't know if the laser can be seen, but it's on the left side of it. Maybe that's 70, and it's all the way down now to 15. So its oscillation is over time declining. The distrust, of course, is the opposite. Its oscillation is expanding. So all of a sudden you have different periodicities where you have an oscillation, but over a longer periodicity, it's increasing or decreasing. And the data doesn't go past 1960. As a historian, I'm fascinated with what the opinion polls would have been in the politics for the familiar. The political system, we bought your position and gift making, and it was that level of sort of history where we think right now we have rancor in politics. There are periods during the Civil War or leading up to the Civil War, the late 19th century, where politics, there was a great deal of perhaps anti-politics. Again, so these might be simple behavior modes. Well, what would his dynamic hypothesis look like? If David Brooks knew how to create a causal loop diagram, he would make a very simple one. And pretend this was printed at the New York Times, because of course we obviously want the system dynamics to be printed in the New York Times. Go ahead, Saeed.
Sorry, I think there's a delay between the presentation and the
No, I can go back.
But Lawrence is saying that also long history of special interest groups resisting policy enactment. For example, fossil fuel lobbying dollars going to repeal renewable energy policies.
Yep. No, that's a good point. So this, and when we talk about politics and anti-politics, these are not defined groups. I would not associate them with political parties or certain candidates. These are more movements. And you might have within that movement special interests who are sort of hijacking it for their own approach. There's or that might be grassroots. This is not trying to get into what it is. It's simply looking at the level of anti-politics. But it's good if you were to really model this deep and look at the causes, you might find some of this is being fueled by outside influences. Which begs the question, do you ever have a system that isn't fueled by outside influences? That's a different question. So the causal loop diagram would, and just in three simple elements, it would have, we have discussed with current politics. We're not happy with the current political system. And that leads to a rise to positive polarity. Anti-politics demand outsiders. So this was a key thing that Brooks highlighted in his sort of statement, is that when anti-politics rise, they want outsiders. They want people free of the taint of the current system. They don't want experience. They don't want establishment. They want to bring someone outside, often who can promise them, and this was in his column, promise large rewards that there's no expectation of ever getting. So a lot of these anti-politics leaders are typified by making extravagant promises to people who are upset that there's no way in the current system. Well, as that increases, you get more incompetent outsiders, and the outsiders that are incompetent lead to disgust with the current system. Right? I often, it's funny, you'll see both sides of the party sort of quote the who's happy with Congress, and it's a very low number. But almost always it looks at, there's two angles to that, is everyone's unhappy with Congress. They're slightly less unhappy with their own party, and they would really like their own party to change. So there's some dynamics in there that are working at that. This occurs as a feedback loop on a lot of them. So if disgust with current politics increases, anti-politics increases, they get outsiders. Outsiders come in who don't understand the system, so they're not able to fix the underlying grievances, and that increases disgust with current politics. So this would be a positive reinforcing loop that would grow forever.
So this happens when people are not happy with the current situation?
That's the question. So that's what I came to when David Brooks presented this. He said the solution to anti-politics was greater communication. More talking, more inclusiveness, things like that, which is very common when my career at that other company for 20 years. You see when you find complexity, a lot of answers is let's communicate more, let's train, let's get a leader. But the question is, to Professor Saeed's point, is there a systemic underpinning to that is driving that makes, even if you communicate, very difficult? So this is a very simple depiction. We know in system dynamics that there's an archetype called the limit to growth, right? Something cannot grow forever. So what is the limit to growth of anti-politics? What is the regulator that might describe the rise and fall of anti-politics as its own limit? So what we have here on the left is the loop that described in David Brooks' column. And again, discussed with current politics leads to an increase in anti-politics who demand outsiders. Outsiders are incompetent, which increases disgust. So this one's churning, and this is where the period we're in right now. We feel like this is us, right? This is our current state. It's happening. It's never been this bad before. Where this is the worst ever. But if we look over here, this loop is a much longer period loop. It's got delays in it at all capacities. And what happens here, perhaps, and this is a competitive or alternative dynamic hypothesis, is that as anti-politics demand outsiders, that decreases politics. Remember, politics is what David Brooks is saying is opposition of anti-politics, the ability to compromise, it's the ability to work together. As you decrease politics, you decrease the successful handling. Oh, good. I received a packet. No, I don't know what that was. Hopefully, not important. All right. So as politics decreases, the successful handling of foreign and domestic affairs also decreases. This is a positive polarity. Like if politics increase, the handling would increase. Now, this is a super broad category. Politics is what you might call functioning legislative bodies that may have different groups in there, but they're able to work on compromise or get on votes that move things forward. That each side may not get all at once, but things move forward. So an example of politics is the federal budget, right? Is the federal budget, which needs to be completed by September 31st, does it complete on time, or do we have to go to continuing resolutions? That's been a common example of maybe this tension between politics and anti-politics. Politics would be you're able to get it done even if everyone doesn't get what they want. And more importantly, the society is okay with that. Implicit in politics is that society accepts that they won't get all they want. And this is Brooks' definition. Anti-politics is winner take all. I want it all. My side wins, my ideology, whatever it is, I get all I want and you get nothing.
So what would be the unit of measure of that?
Well, that's why I did a causal loop diagram, so there's no units of measure. But you could do units of measure. Pew has done research on confidence in the nation, the state of the nation. You hear these polls of how confident are you with the state of the nation. That one's a little tricky because 30% of the people can say, or only 30% can say confident, and then you look up and you say, well, one side has no confidence because the current leaders, and the other side has no confidence because they're afraid that first side is going to get in power, and there's all this rancor. But there are measures like that come from polls. So that would be opinion surveys. There might also be economic measures, GDP. Well, GDP actually would be more of, I guess, over here, successful handling. But this is the question. How would you frame a unit of measure? This is never even brought up. In historical discussions in political science, they never even think about unit consistency. So the question is, how does politics translate into something we can measure? What are some ideas?
Public satisfaction, public trust in legitimacy, perhaps.
These are still indices of sorts.
Yep, indices. Yeah. Not an easy thing to define. So if we accept that as anti-politics increases, politics decrease. As politics decrease, the successful handling of foreign and domestic affairs decrease. I put in foreign here because there's been some cases in American history that I'll get to that are fairly important. As the successful handling of foreign and domestic affairs, over time, my proposed dynamic hypothesis is there's this buffer of tolerance for incompetence of government. And that's a really vague thing, but it's something I use as a buffer. When times are good, we don't need competent leaders, right? We can engage and indulge in ideological fights. We can, the trains will keep working, the lights will stay on, the economy kind of rolls along, and yeah, it's got some dips and stuff, but we're really not having an existential threat. I mean, politicians are always saying this is this election is more important than ever. Well, they say that every election, and we keep going on. But this buffer will decline over time. And my hypothesis is that it's that buffer declining that then when that declines, right, because we had politics declines, so successful handling declines, buffer declines. The buffer, as it declines, it reduces anti-politics. So it reduces the tolerance for this kind of, call it shenanigans, right? We're not going to have people running around promising the world because we got real problems now. Well, real briefly, sort of in American history, and this is not quantified or behavior mode, but this is, again, a historical perspective, one might say that we've had a period of relatively long time where there was a low buffer for incompetence. And that goes from the Great Depression, probably, which is a very sharp existential 25% unemployment, people in food lines. I mean, there's drastic problems. That moves immediately into World War II with a very clear sort of national unity sort of thing, and get the best leaders in place and really struggle. There was a case, I'll get to that case in a second, but then after the Cold War, the war turns to, or after the World War II, it switches to a Cold War. So from 1950 or so, when the Soviets get the bomb, all the way through to sort of the fall of Russia, the USSR, and the dismantling of the Eastern Bloc, you have this period of Cold War where the leaders of the country have their finger on the nuclear button. and sober politics of pragmatism sort of prevails. You know, the Democrats and Republicans could get together, and they might disagree on some of the Great Society aspects or things like that, but they knew these leaderships and leaders would be responsible in some way for the military preparedness. And my contention is that buffer tolerated a very low level of incompetence. However, when the Eastern Bloc goes away, we have the internet boom in the 1990s, times are good, economic, even with the 2000 collapse and the 2009 financial collapse, if you look at economic, not necessarily personal income, because that's a little different, but economic behavior is on a very large upward growth. So maybe that's increasing this buffer. You know, the economic good times, or not even good times, but the perception of economic good times is increasing our buffer. And that would then, again, if the buffer increases, it gives a rise to anti-politics. So this is simply a positive reinforcing loop regulated by a balancing loop that would describe a behavior which raised up anti-politics until the buffer became so low that there was no more tolerance. And then that would drop down and there might be a shift to politics. Now, this is just a proposal. I'm not saying it's right. What might be wrong with it? I saw you shaking your head. Yeah. The buffer is, I don't know what that would be a unit of measure of, but it's sort of a conception.
So if I look to the positive loop, the anti-politics demand for outsiders assumes that the outsiders who will come will be incompetent,
Correct.
which will increase the disgust. On the other hand, if we look to the balanced loop, we go to the buffer of tolerance. Isn't the disgust and the buffer are the same except they're opposite to each other?
Oh, that's a good point. That actually might be, let's see, the disgust with current. So if I said I'm happy with current politics, that might be my level of buffer.
Exactly.
And as that goes lower, it becomes disgust. That's a really good. So it might be a ratio or some opposing sides of a continuum.
I was thinking is that, there's also the relationship, maybe it's against buffers, but also successful handling of foreign domestic affairs. As that goes up, the people that were perceived to be incompetent, because they weren't the insiders, didn't have a thing on the flip machinery operated, they would actually be getting a hang of it. So that maybe it's a feedback.
Right. So if I had some incompetent folks go through here, but it was a period where successful handling. I could name names from political history, but I'm not going to name names because we promised
I
not.
mean, outside of incompetent goes down. Right. Successful handling goes up.
Yeah.
Goes down.
Okay. You're saying as this goes up, this goes down. That's the correct.
That goes up. No, the outside of incompetent.
Right.
Goes down.
Isn't that a huge assumption? Outsiders are incompetent.
That's
David Brooks' essential assumption of the anti-politics. Go
Right,
ahead.
but that's like X and Y theory of people. Everybody's good. That's so that I said that would be the moderator. Maybe part of CLD is successful handling. We have to moderate the outside.
I think if we were to model this, there'd be a nonlinear function or many nonlinear functions to talk about levels of competence or incompetence. And it also depends on too, right? Whose perception of competence? What is the definition of competence? Do we look at bills passed? Well, there are a lot of bills that may be passed we don't want. Do we look at it in budgets file? Well, maybe we don't like certain spending priorities or we think they should be changed.
No, but you were saying like limited anti-politics that maybe if you talk about this conceptual buffer thing, you trying to figure out what that is. That is kind of being represented in what people are saying that if things are really good, people will tolerate negative stuff out there because like sports teams are winning, even though somebody on the team may not be doing well. They're like.
That's what I thought you were saying. I thought you were saying is some anti-politicians get swept along in the tide of good times and they gain experience, but maybe don't lose that. So when the rise comes back up, they may be leaders of the anti-politics faction.
But even in good times, some individuals are not hitting their numbers. So that's why I say successful handling. If you fed that loop back there, there's another negative. There's another feedback loop that outside of
We have a question on the web.
Lawrence is asking how closely are the oscillations tied to long-lived cycles? Are economic cycles related to satisfaction?
This is where I make a plug for SD 557, latent structure. We're in that class. Here, we have a picture. There. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, you could see the data. You could tie it to some of those cycles.
Well, actually, what I was going to say is there are models. Economic theory, and I'm trying to remember, there's a Jungian cycle, and I'm going to get the names wrong, but there are certain cycles of periodicity. There's a 5 to 7 year period. There's a 15 to 20 year period. There's like a 50-year period. There's a 100-year period. There's a lot of, this is all latent stuff. This is all latent structure. If we looked at the campaign ads and stuff like that, this is all underneath the hood. But that class on latent structures, I think, would be a great way. You didn't take Professor Saeed's signature course?
That was the capstone class we had to take.
When are you getting your PhD? No, that's a very good course. So that's a good question. I put delay marks in here on each of these that are not specified, but this may be a very long wave delay. This may be decades. Obviously, if there's an existential shock, right? I don't have external factors coming in, but let's say buffer for tolerance, there's a... Go ahead.
I was still thinking about that buffer for tolerance for incompetence in the government. Is it only for tolerance for the current or incumbent government, or it can also include tolerance for stupid ideas outside of the government?
Yeah, so I would well, the Warren Buffett says when the tide goes out and you see who doesn't have any shorts on, I would say that buffer, at least in the American system, and this is not like a factual thing, this is just my opinion, is when the buffer is high, I don't care. I don't really care about politics. I'm busy living the good life, or I want to pursue that, or I'm trying to get my kids through school, and I'm having aspirational.
That may distinguish between that one and discuss with current politics, because that directly
my life is being harmed. Right. My life is being harmed by the current government. Whether it is or isn't, perception is I'm targeted on the government, where the buffer might be I don't really care. I don't pay attention to politics. Now it's interesting too because voting patterns may be a counter argument that the percentage of population voting is actually going down. So is that a reflection of disgust with politics? I can't affect change. Too much money in politics. Go ahead. There's another question.
Yeah, Henderson is asking. I have questions on the structural problems in the economy. In the economy, for instance, you're asking more questions. It moves.
we may get one of those questions because there are a few more stuff, but these are great questions.
So, for instance,
we can have the CLM, Facebook CLM.
Yep.
Financing of social security or government debt in developing countries are hard to be perceived as real problem. Then the next question. Even before or during crisis, as in the case of Greece, public perception can then be very, very biased about what constitutes successful handling of domestic economic affairs.
This is well. Let's pause for a second. And okay, this is exactly why I think this will be a fun series because these discussions can take up pages and pages of text and paragraphs, and it gets somewhat muddled. When you put it into a causal loop diagram, that has to be logical. Your assumptions have to be explicit. You have to document them, and then you have to. And if you're doing a stock and flow model, it has to work, right? If you are missing parts of your argument or your hypothesis, the model won't work. You can do validity tests to make sure it's a valid model, or at least increase its validity. So this is why I sort of recommend the cloud-dynamics to at least enhance these discussions. So it's not just ideas throwing back and forth. It's here's my idea in a package of producible, replicatable, examinable, questionable, right? If I had screwed up the logic in here and if I had changed this to a negative sign and this is really a positive loop, then this can't be a regulator. This cannot regulate. So these are the kind of things that I think making these discussions explicit would be helpful.
So he continues, suppose the government is dealing well with these structural economic factors but faces a recession, changing the electorate's view towards anti-politics leaders. And continues that my question is that, should the model incorporate a biased public perception?
Absolutely. That's part of the delay. If you were to, this might be a much shorter function, that my disgust is going up. And if we go back to this, I guess it's close, but there may be long-term effects. Well, that actually might be the overall time, right? My overall long-term downward trend is even though we're having some success, and these weren't all bad times. There's a long-term downward trend because of those delays. When you talk about politics, at least in U.S. politics, an economic policy put in place might take 36 months to 5 to 7 years to fully manifest and sort of work its way through the system. During that time, you might have leadership changes. So you might have an economy that's really good, which is actually the result of the policies and leadership of the current term. They might be the result of the policies and leadership of past terms. They might be the result of technological changes that doesn't care. The internet boom was going to happen, and it's a huge upsurge of good economic development.
I was thinking in some sense that the concept here, the apartment cost might be interesting for the carrying capacity.
Yep.
The carrying capacity.
And I would say, now let's take this to the organization. What I wanted to get to is that if this were a company, and we put politics and anti-politics, and the carrying capacity might be for those folks who everyone sort of says, what are they doing here? They're sort of dead weight. I don't think they can do their job. Now, that's obviously a personal perception. That might not be correct. But I think if a company is doing very well, it's probably more likely to have a buffer of leadership. If a company is on the verge of bankruptcy, who is leading it, what decisions they're making, who's in charge becomes a very important issue very quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean, at least in a company, that the better, competent people start coming in, because a company can probably create wrong decisions, as we've seen, and put a tailspin into a collapse. But it was interesting for me to say, does this scenario play out in non-political areas? So business is a little iffy. We'd have to say, could we find examples? However, in military situations, there's one case where this comes into play very quickly. And it's the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, December 1944. The Allies have progressed sort of middle Europe along the German front, and no one thought that the winter there'd be any attack. So all the frontline units pulled back to get rest. They put reserve units up front. They had leaders who had not had combat experience on the Allies' line. And when the German attack happened, it collapsed the line. And within 48 hours, if you look at the radio traffic and you do some, again, analytical analysis, there were massive changes in generals. We had colonels being promoted to general on the spot. We had generals being demoted to majors, and it was entirely based on, can these people lead and fight right now to stop this? So what you see is this cycle activating in a very quick, and I think if I was to model this, there would be something that says the level of severity of the shock. Because the Battle of Bulge is a shock of, if I don't do something, I'm going to get overrun, or we're going to lose our front. So there might be, that may cut these delays down very quickly. But again, don't know where it may apply or don't apply. Quick note on selecting behavior modes. This is, we've kind of already touched on this a little bit, but this is another cue of 65 years of Gallup polling for presidential job approval. Would this behavior mode, though, be good for modeling politics or anti-politics or not?
I don't know the problem that you're trying to model.
Would this be a useful behavior mode for sort of understanding the level of anti-politics and politics if we're looking at presidential approval? I think that this actually gets to a point you made earlier, why I put it in the slide.
It's a single variable.
Exactly.
It's very hard to.
This is the.
There can be multiple explanations.
Right.
You just have single variable, so you don't have a unique theory. You need more information.
And this is where you talked about people may be subject to the system they're in. The presidents come in and we sort of track approval to the president, but is the president really in control of everything that they have, or are they the one that we should model? And this gets into the challenge of cloud dynamics. You can't abandon any rigor in terms of selecting your behavior mode and being careful in what you select in your data analysis just because you're in a sort of new field. You might pick a presidential approval level and then make a model that replicates this, but all you're tracking really is the presidential approval level that goes in Nixon all the way down here has an explanation, a very clear explanation that has nothing to do with sort of politics and anti-politics. It's the behavior and actions and the ongoing scandals. These types of things, a single unique variable might not be a good selection.
Sorry, do you mean like a personal flaws as opposed to like a failure of the regime?
Well, exactly. If you were tracking, even if you were tracking a regime, the question is to what extent, and this gets to Professor Saeed's, is what extent the thing you're tracking reflective of the aggregate actions around it. And if you're tracking a single agent in the system, this could be a CEO approval level. Does the CEO of a large company that is not IBM, but sounds like IBM, have control over all of it? You're talking about 100,000 people. Does a president who manages several million employees, along with economic policies and other things, do they have the control? So is tracking them as an individual useful to understand these broader terms? If we drop this down to like 4 people, then the individual approval levels might work. So there's a scaling function there. What are you looking at? What is your problem statement? Are we looking at a company with 25 senior leaders, or are we looking at a country with large factions? So we have probably about 10 to 15 remaining minutes. And what I was hoping we could do is brainstorm some additional ideas for future sessions of what, and we had a lot of them come out here, so we may want to capture some of those. What would be interesting political dynamic phenomena to explore in future sessions? And we're going to put them up on the whiteboard, and we may even draw a causal loop diagram or something like that. Yes.
So, question I have is, what was the cause of the rise of anti-politics?
The cause of the rise.
Yes, because he his article he says he started from that there is an increase in anti-politics. I was thinking about it in a different way, probably through stocks and flows.
Do you want to diagram something?
Probably can.
I'll operate the camera. Now, I think this is the first time in the CLM we've gone to the whiteboard, so we're exploring new technology.
As Said mentioned, the point about units, stocks and flows help you think about units early on in the process. So if we think about two stocks, probably thinking about maximum 4 stocks. If we think about, I would not say politics here, but because you have a system where people elect or choose, so this means there are people who are in this stock who are.
You would identify with politics.
Politics, politicians, or politicians.
You could call them politicians and anti-politicians
Yes,
for
so,
purposes.
so those are anti-politics or anti-politics. So the unit here are like
people
moving between those two stocks. We have also, I would witnesses called them for simplicity issues. And these are resolved issues. They can be internal issues, external issues that the government is dealing with. So the preferable path is that issues are resolved.
Right.
And those people who are politics or their whoever is represented, they typically they generate issues
Yes,
because
they certainly
the
do.
system always creates issues that needs to be handled. And those issues to be resolved, there is a time delay, which is the political process.
But just a very mechanical point. Cannot have a flow from apples to oranges.
Oh yeah, sorry. No, there will be, yes, there is here issues per politicians, so there is a convergence. So
And we'd assume it comes in, it's going into
it's
an
like a
inflow.
productivity, productivity of
And
sorry.
So it's
right.
an arrow.
I was about to say, you want inflows and outflows in each.
Yes, it's an arrow. Sorry, it's not.
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, this is similar to the dynastic cycle and the descent on it, so I should be drawing it better. So, so based on this and their productivity,
Their productivity making issues.
making issues, because the society is creating issues, and the politicians resolve the issues through the political process. So, when politicians and their supporters raise issues, and these issues are acknowledged, this is when probably creates the engagement loop that people are seeing that the process of politics, that you can take a motion, you can bring it to the Congress or whatever, and then so you see that there is a new process that is taking place. However, over time, people want to see resolved issues too. So this process encourages people to become on this particular side and not to be on that side. However, when the resolved issues increase, and of course we're thinking always about issues and unresolved issues. Probably for simplicity, we have dismissed or ignored issues that just go in the sand. And people monitor all this. What is the issues? What are the results? What is being stuck or being forgotten about? And we have another variable that could be, here is the, let's say, the tolerance, here would be the responsiveness or the effectiveness of the government. That can also have, this would probably have a positivity to take people in this direction. If this declines, it will pull people to that direction because they are keeping, they're thinking about what are the issues being faced and what is being resolved and what is being ignored. So I'm not putting all the links, but this thing takes time to mature and to be perceived by people. So that's just the first shot at the.
No, I think this is good. If I were to go back maybe to David Brooks' hypothesis, we might add a coflow that would a coflow tracking stock that would be experience, and then each year they're there, they gain. So it's one of those coflows that then tracks the inflow and outflow of politicians and can produce a parameter that says average experience per politician that then can have an influence on resolving issues. The more experienced you are with the politicians, perhaps, the more you can resolve issues because you understand the procedures. And the key thing is that David Brooks says that people who are anti-politicians don't understand that they can't get what they want. And that's a defining thing for him of an anti-politician. It's not just someone who disagrees. It's someone who wants it all but doesn't understand why they can't get it. And as experience increases in the sort of the aggregate experience, there may be a hypothesis is that the issues resolved. The other thing I was thinking as we did this is there are supply stocks that would be like material for moving bodies, right? These are potential candidates, potential, because you're going to flow into here and then you're going to shift back and forth. The question, I'm not going to draw all this, the question is if the level of rancor is high, do people who want to be this even enter the system? Do highly qualified people who believe in the political thing of compromise and working through, do they want to enter in if everyone else is anti-politics? Do they want to jump into that fray, expose themselves to that? Conversely, there's probably a mirror image of this on the other side. If 99% of the Congress or the legislative bodies are working in politics, would the anti-politics be able to enter? That may be more a function of the public support. Go ahead.
It seems to me that the growth of anti-politics would create kind of a vacuum in the political sphere because there's this sense that you're waiting for the alternatives, right?
Yep.
You're waiting for the competent outsiders. And so, like you look at what's happening, we're not names,
Right.
But you look at the outsiders that have been drawn in, more regular here with the candidates we have not possible.
Right.
Kind of
You have obviously this desire for change, and you could say broadly that there's unhappiness with the way things are. What the definition of what the way things are probably differs per audience, and that's probably where they get into the split. But there's an agreement that in sort of general, and that draining function is interesting because having spent a few years in DC, I'm not an expert on this, but politicians are very good at deciding what's best for their career. And they might be motivated to switch and become more anti-politic if they feel that's the best means of survival in terms of their maintaining a career. Again, we can get into lots of things, but this is a good stock and flow starting sort of drawn improv. How much time do we Got about 5 minutes. Go ahead, say.
Neuron system actually suggesting some ideas. So,
Great.
He thinks that good examples could be examining drivers of policymakers' decision-making behavior.
So drivers?
Yeah, drivers of actually the behavior of, as I understand.
Yep.
And how policy enactment is a function of serving public will or special interest groups.
So probably ratio between public interest over private interest, special groups, things like that, and how that influences. I'm kind of doing abbreviation in the handwriting no one can read, so but we do have it on the website.
So you should try better because Hamilton is asking for a picture of this. And if you
How about if we type it up? It might be better to type it up. I was never designed to write. So but what other ideas are people interested in? I'm interested from folks who are from different cultures. Are there political systems you want to examine from your culture? Are there are things you want to understand? Like, this doesn't make sense, right? I don't understand why you guys do it this way. What's going on? Are there any questions like that that'd be interesting to explore? Well, I think about it. Email it in. We're going to have these as semi-regular CLMs to kind of parallel, and there may be topics that come up during the presentation. I'm sure there are topics that will come up that might be interesting to model.
One idea could be to compare this structure with other socio-political economic systems, different political economies, like, I don't know, different regimes or different political systems.
Yeah, I would say this system might not, there may be a function of this, but say in Latin America where continuismo, where you don't have term limits, you have long-term people who can stay in power for very long periods of time. That's been a challenge. So there might be a very different dynamic. You might have, in other countries, the method of which leaders are selected is completely opaque to the public. It's done, in a monarchy or an authoritarian where the regime change happens and the public doesn't get an input. You'd have lots of those.
It seems like there are three, sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, go ahead.
So there seems three categories in which different political systems could use really different outcomes, and that is, first of all, in the buffer, right? People are probably sort of acclimatized or adjusted to accepting different degrees, moving or not speaking up until they reach a certain buffer, for one. Secondly, that I can't remember what the terminology was. Are things operating? Yeah, successful handling of foreign and domestic affairs.
There might be a better word for
That's
that.
like zero. Well, it seems to me that the importance of that variable would go sort of 0 to 10 because, first of all, does it matter if people think the regime is successful? Maybe not under some regimes, right? And then.
I want to get to your third point, but tying back to a Fox model, what would be important in that is successful handling may be a factor of issues I care about. We may have a great economy and we may be doing well, but I'm a proponent of resolving structural inequality, and I don't feel that's going fast enough. We may not be doing very well, but I'm very interested in our national security, and we're very I'm comfortable with that. So there are issue voters that may have an influence here of the issues that they say, and that's a little complex. But I think overall is breaking this out and seeing what it looks like, maybe disaggregating the stock a little bit, and getting into what those buffers, the successful handling would mean. When you had a third one,
And the buffer, for example, does it have to reach a point of revolution before the buffer is thin enough to incite reaction?
that might be a future topic because my history is on civil wars, and I think there's a causal loop model that helps explain how civil wars develop, but it has to do with one issue. The issues, here's a bunch of issues, and there's always complexity in civil war, it's never about one thing. But at the end of the day, it does come down to those sort of what issues I believe divide, often along one single issue. And you can pick it out, it may be slavery and the Civil War, it might be religious choice between the French wars of religion, it might be communist versus national, the Chinese Civil War. There is one issue that then grabs up all the other issues and divides it, and you see a division going on. So I think, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in Civil War, so I'll put that. Thanks for recommending that.
And related to those, the third perhaps is, in strong authoritarian regimes, politics might be irrelevant.
Or it might be, what do they call it? There's a term for it. It's politics in the inner circle, right? It's sort of the
Right.
small group dynamic. Elite politics. That's actually very interesting because there's, you can talk about, say, Russia, and is there a commonality of elite politics under the Soviet Union and still under Putin, where there is a circle of elites, and they maybe get there through different means, but it's still effectively under an elite politics structure, and that's a very different structure. That's good. Elite politics. And I think we have to drop the room at the top of the hour, so thank you very much, everyone, for the CLM. Great discussion. We'll do more. Thanks, everyone on there. And
We highly suggest we
when do we stop here?
explore the long-term economic
We're fine.
You-
How do we end it?
Yeah.
How do we end it?
Oh, how do we end it?
For possible months